All right, R2, we're here with our fifth exercise. This one's all about shading and texture. So you're going to start with some really kind of amorphous little outlines of weird little shapes, and you're going to add different kinds of shading or texture to them. You want to think of this exercise as doing a lot of those types of shading that we did in that value worksheet, stipple, cross-hatching, scumbling, but think of them as sort of textures. Maybe they're like stone texture or like a woven texture. What can we do with shading to add texture? Step one is I want you to fill a sheet with just a bunch of different kinds of shapes. And you can use mine here as a reference if you want to see some shapes to add. And then you're going to go through and start to make them these sort of three-dimensional shapes by adding some kind of shading. And the shading can be as simple as just giving yourself some lines as like a bark texture. So if I'm thinking just some lines here that go this way, and they sort of fade out as I go. I just want it to look sort of like wood texture. I'm going to imagine that there's light coming this way. So things up here are going to have more light on them, and things down here are going to be darker. So I'm going to pack in a few more lines at the bottom here. Use a fine point marker or maybe a ballpoint pen for this. Go different directions. Now, where another object is touching one object, give yourself more shadow. I'm just using the same kind of lines that I'm using to make the texture to make the shadows as well. So that way it feels like things have a little weight to them. What these textures could look like, maybe I'm trying to go for some kind of like rough stone here. So it's just like a bunch of little jagged V and U shapes. But down here, I just put more of them so it feels like it's darker down here. So remember what we learned from shading with that value sheet. It's the more lines and dots and things you pack into one area, the more it's gonna look dark. So up here, I might put like just a couple little dashes and dots. And then down here, I'm just packing them together a little more thoroughly. And every now and again, step back, take a look at it. Maybe I need to pack a few more in here. Sometimes I'm just doing straight up dashes to make it really dark on one spot, like at the bottom here. So onto my next piece, maybe I'm doing over here some kind of like scale texture. So I'm thinking like this is like snake scales or dragon scales or something. So I'll start doing like a, let's see, what would that scale look like? Something like this where it's sort of pinched at the top. Now I don't have to apply these scales everywhere. I'm just going to have them kind of like eventually start to like fade out. And I'll just kind of like suggest that they're there without completely drawing them. And then here where it's supposed to be dark, I'll just kind of like do some scumbling over here to fill that in. Where they overlap each other, I'll just do like a little bit of shading here. I could even get more tricky and I got some lines to it for texture, make them feel darker on like one half. Areas in between them, fill them in a little bit with some scumbling, and that'll be like texture and shading all in one here. So for this one, maybe I'll do something like a stipple, where lights come in this way. So up here, I'm gonna like do a bunch of dots and really pack them in there. So I'm saying like this scaly orb is casting a shadow onto this weird pickle-like shape. And then I start to fade some of those dots out. And then maybe I'll put a few out here. And then areas here, I'm gonna start like really dotting some in and just pack in that shading. Kind of like what you're gonna see here. Really packing in that shading in some areas and just adding little textures everywhere else. So fill a page with some shapes, do different kinds of shading. Maybe some of the shading is contours that tell us the shape of something. Maybe it's just a bunch of hatching or really dense hatching and then some kind of like contour that tells us something's round. Textures can be anything, but we're also using it to tell us like what this shape is like and how these lines are curving and moving. So anything you think of, fur textures, stone textures, scales, dots, anything at all, use it to tell us what this thing is doing, what its shape is, and how it's moving around. When you have a page full and you add textures to everything, take a picture, turn it in.